Welcome to Cold War Conversations, the home of real stories of the Cold War.
I felt something hit my leg and bang, and we sort of lay down, shuffled along. Something had hit me across my knee, and I had I still have the big scar, and I was bleeding. The guy behind me said, "I heard the round hit the chimney stack."
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so that you don't miss out on future episodes. David Mackay continues his unvarnished anecdotes about his Cold War career as an officer in the Parachute Regiment. The conversation extends to further experiences in East Berlin, West Germany, Nigeria and Northern Ireland, highlighting the varied roles and military duties he undertook. Through David's unique, humorous and reflective storytelling, he sheds light on the often absurd and dangerous realities of being a British officer during the Cold War. I'm delighted to welcome back David Mackay to our Cold War conversation. With the flag patrols you were doing in East Berlin, did you ever get stopped by the Soviets or interfered with?
Well, see, you have bought the narrative. I'll tell you the facts. The facts are, we'd go off and we would look round the barracks, litter bins, then we got onto the firing ranges, and we'd go in there and we'd look in the toilets. All this in the real toilets, stuff that being thrown, bits of paper they'd be wiping the backside with, all this type of nonsense you bring out. We didn't have poly bags either, but, put it all in there, leave it to the scientists to go on with it. And occasionally you'd find one or two wee bits of metal, occasionally actually a shell casing. So we'd be doing all this, and we'd be up and down the back lanes of East Berlin was, as Tom Hanks portrayed it, was utterly destroyed. West Berlin was like Dubai, it was sensational. So it was easy to ground these places, but it was also very easy to be seen. And every now and then you'd get rammed. Now that isn't, like in the modern connotation, rammed, whatever the hell that means. In those days, rammed meant that. It meant one of these big sort of Soviet-built tank cars would batter you at the back or batter you at the front, but they'd block you in. And then I would have to step out and then say whatever they said in German. I'd say, "Ich besuchte einen sowjetischen Offizier, 999." So, the diplomatic reality was we could only speak to the Russians. We would have nothing to do with the East Germans. And then they would take an hour before a Russian came along. Then he would hum and haw. Then eventually we'd go away. So what we ended up doing is we would take a big tray. You know how you get trays and maybe if you go to a wedding or the cricket team or whatever, they've got no lunch there. We've got a big tray and there's lots of sandwiches and whatsoever. So we'd take that with us. And then, whenever they stopped us, we'd take it out and we'd put it on the bonnet. I would start eating it and we'd say, "Have some yourself." And they'd be looking over their shoulders and eventually they'd be going, having something to eat. So we all knew it was a complete fiasco. But that was what it was. And nobody ever got stopped and held on to and searched because there was no authority. The Russians had no authority to search at all. Because we're not allowing you to search us because you won't allow us to search you. But it was always a good laugh. And we had a scoreboard back at base, how many times people... I don't know if I was stopped the most times, but, I'd say at the end of the month, you'd have something like 10 times rammed. And people were very frank. "Oh my gosh, that's very dangerous." I said, "It's not dangerous at all. It's just a game that we're playing." But we would observe the people. And the East Germans, to a certain extent, weren't aware of that. The Russians were. We'd observe who we're talking to. And we'd memorize who they are, looks like, blah, blah, blah. We'd have a system between me and the driver and the signaller who they were to observe. Boom, boom, boom. And then we'd go back and we'd write it up on the way out. Then we'd hand that over. I don't know whatever became of it. But that's what you were there to do. You were there to see, oh, that's a new type of car they've got. Oh, James, what kind is it? Because all these things matter in the big picture of intelligence gathering. Because most of them are completely useless and just help to serve to clog up and, divert attention away from the proper things. But it was a bit of an adventure, and we refused to take our flag down. You can't fly that flag. Oh, piss off. Flag stays up. No. I don't know if I said piss off, or maybe I learned that word later on, but you said certainly not. You can't fly those flags. And they had guys who spoke very good English, because that's how you get into the KGB. You're a linguist.
Yeah, it must have been quite weird being face to face with the enemy like that in such close quarters.
The one I remember most, I told you I would go to Marienborn Station. I would get out, with salutes and all of this, and hand over these things, and they would say hello. And I learned a few words of Russian, etc. And the guy would talk away to me, blah, blah, blah. And then they would say one or two things, and we'd say one or two things back. It's, oh, hello, it's raining or whatever. One day, this Russian officer, because I had actually been warned, they said, you've been there often enough, they'll have built up a lot about you, because, taking photographs of you and checking up who you are, doing the normal. And the Russian officer, we would march into the little office, and they would sit on one side, we'd sit on the other, and I would hand over all the documents, and he would look at them and he'd hand them back. I think he stamped them as well, or he had a clerk there who would do that. But he said to me, oh, you're Scottish. Well, I couldn't deny that. And I said, yes, I am, yes. He said, and you're from Glasgow. So I immediately, being quite clever, I thought, well, they've obviously done a wee bit of homework on me, because they know I'm from Glasgow. Or maybe they're just chancing it. I said, yes, I'm from Glasgow. I said, oh, you like football? I said, yes, I like football. Because I was the football officer of the one para team in Berlin, so my name was well known, put all these football things, just have to look at it, and it's me. And he said, so, do you support Celtic or Rangers? And he was sort of sitting there, ho. I said, no, not at all. I support Partick Thistle. And he went, he hadn't the faintest idea what I was talking about. And he said, what? I said, go and look us up. We are the people. Because I am a legend at Partick Thistle, because I am the final story in the book about winning the League Cup, because I parachuted back into the exercise after getting up to Glasgow for 36 hours, then back down to Aldershot and jumped out of the aircraft and back on with the exercise. So that was the being face-to-face. Other times, there was a bit on the border, checkpoint Bravo. So you got into the checkpoint Charlie was where you got into East Berlin. Checkpoint Bravo was where you got out of West Berlin and into East Germany on the road. And it just basically had a building you went into and a little cubbyhole you stuck things through, and you couldn't really see anything. But they would keep you waiting, let's say an hour, and you couldn't do it, because they had to stamp it and write the time you were leaving on it to make sure that, you were fully authorised. And you think, what are they doing in there? And I peeped out through a little crack once, and I saw them just sitting there drinking, I suppose it was tea or coffee. And I was shouting through, and I thought, well, I would like to have a drink of tea. And they eventually brought some out, and I had a drink of tea. So it's very hard to see people who are promoted through our narrative as the enemy, and every one of them is a child murderer or whatever, all of this type of stuff. And just people, same as our lot. I thought, well, they all look like big pansies. They don't look like paratroopers who are all in the main pretty determined and guys you don't want to fall out with. They just appeared to be guys who doing their national service and dragged in, as cannon fodder. But there was always in the background, there's whoever it was, and these guys probably be Stasi and the Russian side, the KGB, that steely professionalism that kept you on your toes.
Did you ever lose a classified document while you were in Berlin?
Oh, yes, I know. I've got the lashes on my back for doing that. I have to explain to you in reality what classified means. Recently, and I say recently, over the last year or 2 years, there have been some cases of some military documents and somebody pinched them and it says, and they have restricted written on them. Restricted is written on every single document in the military. Restricted. It's only in the military should be looking at this. And they say, oh, it's classified. I say, no. Classification is whether it's confidential, secret, or top secret. That's an intelligence-led thing. Restricted means bugger all. It just means this is the factory handbook for the 9mm gun, except we've written some restricted on the bottom of it. Saying, so you can go walk in a shop that's got the exact same text, but it doesn't have restricted on it. Whereas if you lose the restricted one, you've lost a classified document. So one of my tasks in Berlin as the signals officer was I had to issue a signal instruction, for every week. We changed our frequencies, all of that stuff. But we also then had, that was operational. We also then had the training side of it, whereby I had to write a signal instruction. And this would cover everyone in the battalion. So it's about 5-8 pages long. And it's basically lots of numbers and code words. So this only came into play when we got Rocking Horse, which was when the general or the chief of staff pressed the button and we had to turn out to defend Berlin against the hordes. We used to say the only way we can defend Berlin is to get all the traffic lights to red on the Heerstrasse, which is the road that runs through the Brandenburg Gate all the way west, because there weren't enough British troops or Americans to make any flipping difference. But we went out and practiced this pointless exercise, and some of it was all good soldiering. We decided, well, we would do getting into assault boats and going across the Havel, which is a big winding waterway in Berlin. It's about a mile wide, 2 miles wide at times. And these were the tin boats with the outboard engines. So it was all good practice, but I had to give out the signal instruction. So I would write it, we would use it, and then we would destroy it, and it would be certified destroyed. That's not a problem, because somebody else would do that. The adjutant, he would check all the numbers, and him, the chief clerk, and burn them. Completely pointless, because it's already happened, and it's not giving away any information worth, apart from knowing my name. I'm the only person that's named on it at the bottom. I would write, I'd then have the new one would be written, because we had training frequencies which were allocated. So when we had the Rocking Horse call out, we'd issue the training frequency instruction to everyone that was taking part, and off we'd go. So I was leaning across my Land Rover in the dark with a wee torch, looking at my training instruction. I'm just checking some of the code words, because I knew them all because I'd written them. Anyway, and I had a big map there as well, and blah, blah, blah. Then eventually we moved on. So when we got back to barracks, it was all stand down. My job was to check all these back in, and I couldn't find mine. So we searched everywhere. We went back, we drove up and down the roads. Of course, the Russians had followed us throughout the exercise. That's all they do. That's what we did with them. So somebody found this valuable instruction. So I was then, I could have said, oh, so what? Just forget about it. No, I reporting myself. I was marched in front of the colonel, and I was then sent off to the general, marched in there. The general, well, this is blah, blah, blah. And then he said, I will issue my sentence to you later. Anyway, we left Berlin about 6 or 8 weeks later, and we're back in Aldershot, and the adjutant said, oh, you have to see the CO. It's to finish off that thing from Berlin. So I marched in, saluted the CO. I said to him, do I take my beret off? He said, no, forget that. So he's just marching. The CO looked up at me and said, "This is this terribly serious matter of losing a bit of paper that had restricted written on it." Because you couldn't classify a training thing as confidential because it doesn't relate to anything of any use. It's just saying, we're going to do this, I'm going to change frequencies at these times, and these are the code words you've got to use, and these are the frequencies, which they already know anyway, because all the units use the same training frequencies. So the colonel looked up and said, "This is, a very serious matter, and your career could be in ruins because of this." So I was thinking, what's this about? Geez, am I out in Civvy Street now? I said, "So, consider yourself bollocked." And I saluted and marched out. But that's the whole point, that we overclassified. This was just a piece of paper. It didn't mean anything. We'd already done what was on it. And all of the training frequencies were there. But I moved from there to go to 4 Para, where I was in charge of all classified documents. And I made a point of not allowing that mindset to set in. I say, no, we're going to go after the ones that the army sends us that says confidential on them. The other ones don't matter. Because, you don't know where all these documents are going that are in the base. But you know where the ones are going that are in the safe. Because I had a wall safe with 2 turning locks on it. Because we were the command unit for Leeds Garrison. So there you are, and that contained all the top secret instructions of what Leeds was to do in the case of a Russian attack.
In Berlin, if the Warsaw Pact had come over the wall, where were you supposed to go? What was your mission?
In Berlin, it was a very odd one, because Berlin, you couldn't defend Berlin on the ground. There's nothing you could do. You could dig a few holes and shoot at people somewhere, but there weren't any features. So nobody could be channeled into things and then held up because they couldn't get through it. So it's just a huge big floodplain, hundreds of miles all the way till you go west to get to Fulda, and the famous Fulda Gap in West Germany. That was the first place where mountains appeared. And they weren't really mountains, they were like the Cotswolds. And then you go south in Germany, you would get down to the Alps. But Berlin was just flat all the way between that bit of Germany and all the way to Russia, near enough. Yeah, across the Pomeranian marshes. So what we were doing was showing that we are, we were British Army and we were fully prepared to resist. And that was all we were going to do. There was nothing we can do. We had 1 or 2, we had to go. All of the motorways and bridges and roads that were built in West Germany after the war, they all had what we call mouse holes put in them. And that's so we could put explosives in there. So with a whole load of explosives stored somewhere, which I suppose the engineers would have kept up to date. And we would bring them out and go along to these places and stick them in these holes and blow them up. So we'd slow them down, and because of the waterways, it would take them a long time to get across. Because it wasn't just, there's a river, the Havel. The Havel's huge. It's a bit like Enniskillen, like Loch Earn, next to Enniskillen. It's the very same, lots of islands and whatsoever. So it'd take you a while to get across it if you didn't have the road. So our job was basically to sabotage the roads and the bridges, and that would slow down the advance. I mean, we'd all be obliterated by that stage because, there's nothing, we couldn't get away. We couldn't, not even the Americans couldn't get away. They were in the same boat. And the French, they would have charmed their way out, I suppose, because the French are very cavalier, debonair attitude to all the NATO and what's, oh, yes, well, if we have to do it. So what? But we'll just do what we like doing. So the defense of Berlin to us was just it was a joke. You couldn't defend Berlin, as Hitler found out.
So after Berlin, you're with 4 Para from 1976 to 78. You're a captain and you're in West Germany. What are you up to in West Germany?
Well, this was a bit more interesting because we were part of 44th Parachute Brigade. That was the reserve brigade. And it had a wartime disposition because it had to go to this place in Germany and defend that area. So we had a designated place to go to. And what we would do is twice a year, the colonel and I would take the officers with us. We'd go across. Sometimes we'd take part in a big CPX, command post exercise, in which we'd be in the field and it'd be a command post in a barracks when they'd all been in a gymnasium. There's dozens upon dozens of officers and sergeants sending instructions out on all these various units. It's just like a big war game, except we'd be out in the field doing it. So our role was basically we would parachute in, ho, flaming ho, and then we would be defending on the forward slopes, because that was the best way to slow down the Russian tanks, because that's these little tin tanks, they'd come trundling forward, the T-54s. Not very good, but had loads of them. And our job, because we're brave and tough paratroopers, we would let them roll over the top of the trench, and then we'd get out with the 66 millimeter, which is like, it's just a big tube, and we'd shoot underneath the tank, and that would be knackered. It would probably be on top of our trench as well, and we'd be doomed at that stage. But that's what our job was to do. That's what to do. With some other bits, and which were to sort of interdict the road network, because it was always beside a huge forest. So we'd do the old trick. You'd be dropping trees, and you'd be cratering roads and mucking up bridges. So that's what we did. And we, from one point of view, it was totally removed from the Cold War. But from another point of view, it was very interesting because the locals, because you meet the locals, you can't avoid meeting the locals, even though you're on exercise. And they'd be very grateful because they were terrified that the Russians were going to come, because a lot of them had been there the last time they came across. So they had a living memory. Nowadays, I don't see how you could have that type of approach, because the locals don't know anything about it other than, well, apparently it happened before and it wasn't very nice. In my day, this was real. I was here, my father was killed in the Eastern Front, which was a vast slaughterhouse, the Eastern Front. People used to laugh and I say, wait a minute, the casualty figures are, it's like 10-1 in favour of the Eastern Front. Oh, so that was our role. There was nothing heavy about it. How on earth, the tactical plan was going to work. One British corps was going to defend that bit of Germany, etc. And we were going to be on the reverse slope. Even doesn't matter which bit of the slope you're on, because if you're in a trench and it's lots of tanks coming towards you, there's not much that you're going to do other than occasionally manage to cripple one of them. But that's what our policy was. And then, the final bit, at a certain point, Sackhower, the American general, he will authorize tactical nuclear weapons on our area. That was, because it's great. You can make up all these scenarios and have great seminars about them, but then you have to put people in them. And when they hear what's going to happen, they're not really too impressed, Well, that sounds a great idea. Well, if they don't slaughter us, we'll get nucleared. Well, have your NBC suit on. That would be good. Make sure you've done all the proper preparations and keep that, jab thing, the pen thing, like, those pens you stick in your leg if you have that peanut allergy. That's the type of stuff. If you've got gene gas or whatever the heck it was, just jab it in your leg, and that meant you wouldn't die. You'd just lie about there very ill for a long time. So I'm not so much cynical about what was going on. It was all a lot of window dressing. The reality is, the Russians, had they attacked, the only way to stop them would have been to batter them with nuclear weapons. But the Western Europeans didn't want that, because they were on the end of these nuclear weapons. So we then had to say, well, we'll put lots of soldiers there and that'll slow them down, and you bring your own lads along, like I talked about the Danes, that'll cause a problem. Then we'll agree peace terms with them. Oh, it's, we got loads of heavy stuff, and all these people tell us how serious it was and blah. You look back and say, what a load of tosh. We just absolute tosh. But we did it. We did it very well. We're very proud of what we did. We did it correctly and all of that.
Did you work with the Bundeswehr airborne formations at any point?
Yes. Well, on my side, we worked with their airborne people, the Fallschirmjäger, and they were quite decent. They were guys who become paratroopers are basically warriors. There's lots of people in the military for lots of different reasons, but guys who go into like the Marines and the airborne, we go in there because we're warriors. We're not afraid of combat with hard things and dangerous things. That's quite good for us. So they were the same as us. And I had one ludicrous story. I went to the German officers' school on a visit with some other officers, and we went on exercise with them. And it was like an incident course. You had to, maybe took you about 4 hours to get around. There was various military tasks you had to do. You had a team, whether it was 4 of us or 6 of us, I don't know. And you go round it and you had to cross a bridge and you had to climb up something, you had to shoot and all that. And one of them, you had to throw grenades. And these were the stick grenades, which the Germans has, the ones you see, Clint Eastwood films, throwing those. So I got down. I said, I'll do that, certainly. Crawl forward, because you had to obviously crawl through the mud. And one or two of the other officers, they were from the guards, so they didn't say, on you go. We have nothing to do with that. Crawl through and throw it. So I threw the first one. The guy was telling me, I said, I'm left-handed. He says, oh, no, you have to do it this way because the way we're lying just now. So I tried to throw it with my right hand, and it literally went about 10 yards away. And I had to face in the mud, boom. And then I got a tap on my shoulder and looked round. There was the commandant, the German commandant, paratrooper. He says, give it to me. He didn't have a right hand. He'd lost it in the war, but he had a left hand. And it went in straight through the window, boom. So that taught me that the German airborne were just like us. They were very aggressive. They would take the fight to the opposition. That because you hadn't any option. If the opposition are standing in front of you, is discussing it like old chums doesn't work. You've got to do something. Whether it's run away very fast and up very high hills for 2 or 3 days, that's what you do. Or whether it's to get stuck into them, that's what you do. But how the Germans worked their other stuff, I don't know, because if you were a tanky, you would know a lot about that, because you'd have taken part in armoured exercises in Germany with German armoured people, whereas they couldn't bring their armour to the UK. If they came, tankies came, they'd be riding in our armoured vehicles.
So you're promoted to major and you're posted to Nigeria. So this is 79 to 80. What's your role in Nigeria?
Well, it's very interesting. At that stage, having finished being the adjutant, I was told, well, you have to go and do a staff job. And I said, I don't want to do it. I don't work in an office. I said, no, lots of things very good for your career, all this stuff. So I was lined up to go to a post in Germany. Blah, blah, blah. I then got a phone call from regimental headquarters. Remember the Airborne Forces HR department, how we do it. And the regimental adjutant said, oh, David. I said, oh, Joe, yes. I vaguely knew this chap because his mum was a distant relative of my dad's, about boom, boom. I said, what is it? He said, we've got a post. He says, I'm actually phoning you from the, I think called the Deputy High Commission in Kaduna in Nigeria. Because I've just moved here on my new posting, a staff job here. An instructor at the staff college, Nigerian military staff college. I said, oh, why are you phoning me? He said, well, we have a a staff officer post here which is just going vacant. And I thought, why don't we put another paratrooper in there? Do you fancy going? And I said straight away, yes. That's how much it took, yes. So about 3 or 4 weeks later, having been on a 2-day course run by some Foreign Office people in, I think it was Farnham, off I went. Very interesting, because I'm a very nosy person. I want to know everything. I'm not interested in gossip. I want to know, how does this work? How did that happen? What are those symbols on the map? What do they mean? What's the history of the place I'm going to? So I knew all about Nigeria, far more than most people who are regarded as experts. So I went there with full of knowledge and excitement. And it was great being there, because to cut it short, the Nigerians had been independent since what? I think 66, round about then. Blah, blah. That wasn't too far. You thought, what? When is this? Well, this is 1979, 1980. I had to work with the Nigerian, the headquarters of the Staff College. So the first point was the Commandant of Staff College, a Nigerian Army officer, was a chap at the time called General Abacha. Subsequent to his time commanding the Staff College, he decided to take over the country and stole billions upon billions of pounds till he eventually died of, I suppose, a bad diet round about 2000 or whatever. Then someone else took over. So, obviously, he had a lot of charisma. But my interaction with him took place in the football field, because someone suggested that I should play in the football game. There was a football game at the Staff College. I said, why? They said, well, you're a well-known football player, which I was. Right, I said, okay, I'll play. So I actually have a photograph of the incident. He came round to meet the teams, first of all, and he's wearing one of these white blazers with stripes on it. Fair enough. Shake hands with him, stand there. Yeah, yes, sir, no, sir. And then he decided halfway through the game that he was going in goal for the other team. So the other guy got out of the way. He went in goal. I danced into the penalty box. I gave him the normal Scottish swivel hits, and he just went straight through me, nearly killed me. So that's a penalty. No, it wasn't. The Nigerian Army referee would not give the penalty. So I didn't moan about it, but had a good laugh afterwards. So one of the jobs I had to do, and this is, you might think this is ludicrous, but it's educational. The British government, when they send you on loan service to another country, that basically means that the other country will pay for you being there. So it means you near enough get double pay being there. It's called local overseas allowance, and it's calculated by all types of tabulated things, but it's basically you get double pay. However, in order to receive that pay, the British government doesn't pay the money into our bank account as a Nigerian training team, but it goes to the headquarters of the Staff College, who immediately steal all the money. So my job was to try and get news of when the money had arrived, and then get down to the bank and get it out and transfer it into our account. I never managed it. So the next phase was, I would then, realising I hadn't done it, I'd go round to the High Commission, go into the secret room, and at times, yes, this is true, at times early on, being a former signals officer, I would get out the Morse key and tap it all the way through. And then the Commonwealth Office would send the appropriate amount of money into our bank account. This happened every single month for 2 years. It was just a big laugh. Our money was stolen, and we never got it. And then we had to pay. So not only were the Nigerians not paying for it, we were paying 3 times as much as we should have been paying. But it's all to do with a strategic liaison. And that was where I was introduced face to face with the CIA. The High Commissioner, Deputy High Commissioner, said, I want to meet these two people from the American embassy. They'll meet you in town. And I had to go to this hotel and went into it. And a couple of black American guys there, and they introduced themselves. And they wanted me to pay attention to various things because I was a member of the local rugby club. Fair enough. But more important, I was involved in scouting, and I was the state scout commissioner. So I travelled all over Katoona State, which is, about the same size as Scotland still. And that's 10 roads, so you couldn't really get lost. It was all flat. So it was easy enough to travel around. So I used to come back when I on my weekend travels and submit a report only to the Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Wilson, who was another famous guy. And he would then pass this on to the CIA, and then occasionally they'd come back and ask me things about it. So I thought I was an international spy. But when we were there, and this is where you start looking at the Cold War again, the Indian Army, which was linked with the Russians, of course, they ran the School of Infantry. So, and that was right next to where I lived. So I had to keep paying attention there and write little reports as to what I'd observed that was different. So that was the Russian influence. Then there was the School of Artillery, which, yes, the Chinese, they were in there running that. Oh, God almighty. So you had the Cold War there, even though you were in Nigeria. You were saying all this, and you had to go back and say, well, they've all got new motor cars, all those officers. And they say, well, the Russians have given them money to buy it. So the British would then get some money to the Nigerian officers, so they would all have new motor cars as well. And it was I wouldn't say it was fascinating, I would just say it was entertaining. But that was as involved as I got there. Apart from my Morse, I was asked to stop doing it after a while because they'd moved on to these, straightforward, very easily deciphered means of communication. Getting a bit. I suppose it was digital comms coming in, but it was interesting. As I say, everywhere I went, you got this. You got a whiff of the Cold War, and you got a whiff of the spies. It's there. Yeah. It's there. It's all part of the job.
You're there at the time when the sort of military is being moved over to be handled by a civilian president.
Yes, that was very instructive. They decided, we've had various presidents, but the guy who was going to stand down was General Mohammed. He's still around. He came back, became president, about 40 years later, 30 years later. But, handing it over, because this is all to do with, other Western governments saying, well, we won't pay you more money unless you become civilian. Say, all right, well, we'll become civilian and you can still pay us the money. That's how it works. It's very straightforward. It's not hidden. So they'd arranged elections, and they had all the electioneering, and they elected a chap called Shehu Shagari as the new president. And he was a northerner. We were in northern Nigeria. That's where all the Muslims are, northern Nigeria. And we'd actually seen him and wondered. But we paid attention to what was happening in the staff college. And in the staff college, there were various mutterings of, very, very, so I would say heavy-handedness coming in from the Nigerian government, which was still military. And at one stage, there was a visit, and I wasn't allowed to go to it. I think the brigadier was allowed. I'm sure he was. It was General Danjuma was coming, and he was chief of something in the Nigerian government. I don't know what it was, intelligence, something like that. However, General Danjuma in 1966 had been a captain, and he'd been one of the guys who had overthrown General, I think it was Ironsi Johnson, and this guy was the military president of Nigeria. They went into his office and shot him, but before shooting him, they tied him up with barbed wire. Dan Juma was in charge of this. He organised it. So this is the guy who's in charge of intelligence. He then came along and he basically said to them, we're handing over to the military. If anybody starts any nonsense, they're for the high jump. I don't know his actual words, but that's what he said. And over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we got genuine stories of some officers disappearing overnight and never being seen again. Boom. So they had obviously not agreed and muttered, and somebody then told about them, and off they went. What I understood from the whole point was we live in a Western culture where death is something that we try to avoid. They live in a survival culture, which means if you don't do these things, you'll be dead. So it is a real difference in culture. So the Nigerians were basically saying, we're going to play the Western game here because it's in our interest to do so. But if any of you mutter about anything, because Dan Juman knows all about what the junior officers can get up to, and these things happened.
In 81 to 83, you're with one para. Were you disappointed that you didn't end up in the Falklands when that started?
Short answer is yes. We were in Northern Ireland. We were the Spearhead Battalion. I was a company commander, C Company 1 Para. Boom. When I arrived in the battalion from Nigeria, the colonel said, well, there's a choice of 5 guys to be your Sergeant Major. I just looked down. Sergeant Major Williams, he's my man, because he and I knew one another for years. He'd played in the football team and we'd served together many times. Great guy. So we were in Edinburgh, and that was officially a home defence job. Defence for UK, And fair enough. But we went off to do, I was chosen, Hereford needed somebody to run the escape division. So I put my hand up. Yeah. So off we went. Needless to say, I ran it in a very different way from anyone who'd ever done it before. Escape and evasion is basically a certain stage in the selection process. There's maybe 70, 80, 90 guys still in the game. They managed to trudge over all the hills and get to all the checkpoints. And then they all get rounded up. They get given basically prison garb. They get given old trousers with a piece of string round them and a blue poly bag for keeping their blanket warm in, and some old gear. And they have to escape up a sort of through these valleys and get to the far end. Once you're captured, you get interrogation, real interrogation. So I did it totally differently. I decided, when I looked at the previous ones I'd done, I said, that's a load of nonsense. That's idle behaviour. I staked out all the high ground, put 2-man OPs in the high ground, ran it all through the junior officers, and had 2 swoop teams which come in helicopters whenever they spotted anyone. They'd been reported. Within 12 hours, a big helicopter flew into my farmhouse. Michael Rose, CO 22, got out, and he said, right, you're doing a good job. I just thought it was a pat in the back. He said, however, I've stopped the exercise. You've caught so many people, we cannot handle it. You will have a giggle at this. This was on a Thursday. He said, if it had been Saturday morning, it wouldn't have mattered because all the TA would have been here. Because half the interrogation folk come from the TA, come from reserve units. They're trained, I don't know, psychologists or whatever, and they're all the university professors or whatever, but they haven't turned up yet. So we'd caught too many people for the full-timers to cope with. So that was a great exercise. Then we got the call-out, because we were the Spearhead Battalion. So we drove all the way from South Wales, all the way up to Edinburgh, jumped out, had a few beers, jumped back in the bus, and then ended up in Northern Ireland for the next 10 weeks. Now, it was very interesting. There had been quite a bit of IRA targeted assassination in our area. I just swamped it with my guys, and they were great. You know, they did very well. I was in Armagh. You see how daft people are in these situations. But even there, particularly in Armagh, we got, well, in that area there, we're sure there are Russian sympathisers or whatever, or Russian sleepers or whatever. This was actually quite a decent int briefing. And where it wasn't, I don't know, but there were a lot more Soviet weapons. You know, the IRA was practically fully armed, apart from the 5.0 sniper rifle. They all appeared to be Russian weapons, you know, Kalashnikovs and God knows what else. Semtex, all of these things come from Czechoslovakia, you know, etc. So we had a very interesting time. We then came back, and 6 weeks later, we went back on the regular tour that was plugged in for us for the next 6 months. So by that stage, we knew what we were doing. We went to Lisnaskea, which is in County Fermanagh, and we got on with it there. That was all relatively straightforward. I used it as a big training area. It was a fabulous training area to your military training in. So everything that a platoon commander was expected to know about and to be able to do, I did. Even though it was snow, etc., our guys went out. They spent most of the time out trudging through the fields and hedges. And I even got them to do water crossings on some of the small lochs. So they'd have to take all the gear off and put it in a poly bag and swim it across the other side, etc., get out, dry their weapon off, and all of this. And they all loved it. So it was an exceptionally good training system. But yes, we had some excitement. You know, we did find a big amount of explosives. But on one more notable occasion, the one thing you don't want in anything is your boss on your shoulder. The military is appalling for that. You know, if you think of the Vietnam War, they had the commanding general up in a chopper or a plane above whatever was happening, all the way down to the platoon commander that was trying to handle it on the ground. So one day we had an incident. Some shots were fired. It was quite close to the border, half a mile from the border. Set up everything. And the CO came flying in to my headquarters and said, right, we're going to such and I want you to take me there and blah, blah, blah. So I knew first and foremost, because I was sophisticated by that stage, don't say, no, we're not doing it. I'd say, yes, I'll brief the pilot. So I went to the pilot, told him where to go, which was miles away. So we flew around in circles around this place for a while. Then when I knew the other thing had ended, and these guys had been caught over the border by the Gardaí, I said to Pat, right, go to the real place now. Because in the end, it's not about high level. It's only about you as a soldier of some description get given responsibility for a piece of ground, however big that is, and you want to be left alone to look after it because you are fully equipped to look after it. The last thing you need is a colonel and a helicopter barking out orders. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And, you know, all types of nonsense. But there was another naughty we got involved in. I should have severe regrets about it. I don't, it's just a laugh. If people can't take a joke, well, I'm very sorry. I didn't set out to annoy you. But people can be as annoyed about anything. I say, well, big deal. I'm not interested. It was Airborne Forces Day. And of course, we couldn't have an Airborne Forces Day because all the guys were deployed, etc., etc. But we did have an outpost in a small RUC, small police station. And my sergeant there was fed up with having to fight the RUC because these guys were appalling. They were very anti-Catholic and, you know, very badly behaved. We wouldn't take them with us on any patrols because they would just get us tainted by their anti-Catholic behaviour. This is factual. It's not, you know, something that doesn't happen and that I'm havering about. It's just we found it, you know, very distasteful. We're there to stop you from killing each other and you're spending the whole time provoking people. So you're not coming with us. You do that on your own. So what I decided, in conjunction, I must say, with my Sergeant Major, so he's slightly to blame for this because he's about a year older than me, so he should have stopped me. We had a helicopter, and if I say apocalypse now, you might have an understanding of what we're doing. So we flew this helicopter over the police station because they had been playing all these orange tunes. Unbelievable. And ended up, my sergeant went in and wrecked the disco machine, whatever was playing them. I fucking cut it out. We're not having this. No, we can't have it. So we flew over it with a couple of speakers, with myself and the sergeant major aboard. And we're playing the Ride of the Valkyries, because that's the regimental march. So we're just like Robert Duvall, I sure like the smell of napalm in the morning when he's coming out with his 7th Cavalry hat and stripped to the waist. And we flew up and down there for 10 minutes, and we didn't get any complaints about it. It was very interesting. So I think the Catholics have realised that, well, there's something going on here, but it's not, it doesn't bother us, so we're not going to complain about it. And the Proddies realised they're making a point here, perhaps we should pay attention. And that's all it was in Northern Ireland. In the main, it was a balancing act. Just the same as my son's doing now in Cyprus between Greeks and Turks, Catholics and Protestants. Let them both know that you're not here to play games. You're here to be fair and straightforward. I will call you out. In fact, the colonel had, well, this probably was in regimental history by now. He had decided that he was going to have a cocktail party. Well, none of the company commanders wanted to go because we've got an area to look after. It's like about 10 miles by 10 miles. We've got important things to do. People in there trying to kill us. No, you have to go to it. When we got to it, the chap was there, and he was the Lord Lieutenant of the county. So we threw a wobbler. We got the colonel. We said, this guy is also the Grand Master of the Orange Lodge. What's he doing in our mess? Oh, no, he's here as the Lord Lieutenant. I said, he is the same bloke. That job gets this title as well. It's like Keeper of the Castle, and you have various other things because you're the Keeper of the Castle. So we're standing there, and the chap said to us, well, you gentlemen have been here quite a lot. And we said, yes, we have, yes. I said, how do you think the situation would ever get resolved? And my brother officers, they were all English lads who had been to public schools, and they were all well sophisticated, whereas I wasn't. I just thought, I'll just tell them. I said, it's very easy, very straightforward. There are more Catholics here than there are Proddies. So what we should do, we the Brits, we should get out and form a big ring round the outside and let you get on with it. And in the end, the Catholics will win. That's where we are now in Northern Ireland, because of the Catholic population is far outnumbers the Proddies, something like 60 to 40 now. That's why there's all these fight to the death, but it's just a fact. I don't know how you change how people think, and you can't do that, but you can basically observe the facts. But that got me an interview with the commanding officer the following morning.
Yeah, I can.
And I said, you should have said that, Colonel. I said, and you shouldn't have compromised your company commanders by putting us in the room. I said, because you didn't have the local bishop there. He refused to come. I said, well, you should have cancelled the invite for the other guy. So he wouldn't come because he was coming, because he would get kudos in his gang for saying, I wouldn't go because he was there. Oh, what a player. And you're in the middle, and occasionally you must just sort of kick out.
While you were in Northern Ireland, did you ever come under fire from the IRA or in contact with them?
Well, I had two interesting ones. One, my very first tour, 1971, I had gone with the patrols platoon guy. There was text to it. Two of them were attached to each platoon. And we got up on these roofs So they're just like sort of Coronation Street rows, they're not big, tall. There are big, tall tower blocks, but we weren't near them. I'm going up, and it was a Saturday night fever. They were throwing petrol bombs down the road. There was guys shooting down the road and all of that. And the next minute, we're creeping across this roof, sort of holding on with one hand to the slopey bit and trying to lean into it. I felt something hit my leg, and bang, and we sort of lay down, shuffled along. Something had hit me across my knee, and I had I've still have the big scar. And I was bleeding, but, being highly trained in first aid, I said, that's all right, that's no problem. And then there was a guy behind me said, I heard the round hit the chimney stack. So we immediately got ourselves down, It's amazing how well you can leap 12 foot off a roof when you're motivated, feet and knees together. Then the other time, this is quite a famous time. I must get the exact thing ready. Anyway, it was the 1971 Football European Cup Winners' Cup final. And it was Chelsea, who had won the FA Cup the previous year, versus Real Madrid, I think it was. Yes, it was. Anyway, we were watching the game. We had a little house in just off the Shankill Road, right in the middle of, problem areas. And on the upstairs landing, we had an OP, and a big, sort of like an inch thick metal window with a peephole on it, and a sentry would sit up there and he'd sort of look out and see if then, because there were the back lanes. Anyway, we were doing whatever it was. We were watching this game of football and peeping in and out, and then there was kaboom, the lights fell out and all of this place short circuited. Immediately I knew that's a bomb, and shouted up, Platoon Sergeant shouted upstairs to the, "Whoa, how are you?" Blogs of what he says, "Oh, I'm all right, blah, blah." And then he ran up there, and I grabbed the patrols platoon corporal. We both made for the door because we knew what I had to do. I had to run out, go along the main road, down the side road, then up the alleyway. So if we just think of that, that's going to take us at least a minute to get that done at the fast. So out we went, out the door, and I could only think, this is a setup. They're waiting to shoot us when we get out onto the main road. But it didn't happen. We did what we call a pepper pot. I went out first, straight across the main road, secured myself. He came out round the corner, secured. I ran it. We did that all the way down, round the corner, and into the back lane. So I said, right, call in, let them know, because he carried, I think it was called a storno phone in those days. We didn't have mobile phones or small radios with huge monster things. So I knew he had heard this communications means, except he didn't. He said, no, it's charging. It's sitting there charging. We ran past it, So we didn't have any comms. And I was wanting to say, we're coming up the back lane, don't shoot. So we went up the back lane. I had a pistol. He had a pistol. Now, pistols, they're all right for shooting somebody that you're sitting across the other side of the table. They're not very good for anything else. Of course, there are some superb pistol shots and very good. I'm not one of them. Most people aren't. They're too hard to use. Then I saw him. I had the movement up the top, the left turn bits at the top. I had a movement. Weapon up, two-hand grasp. I said, being left-handed on the wrong side of the road, it meant I was standing out in the middle of the lane. So this guy could have come around the corner and shot me. But you don't think of it at the time. You just go on to. I just was about to shoot him. I saw his foot come out. And I noticed, because this was in the olden days, that he was wearing a pair of black boots with puttees. Those brown bandages. So I didn't shoot. It was an officer from further up the road. Then I gave him a bollocking for being there. Then, eventually, the colonel turned up and had a go at me. I said, wait a minute, sir. I said, I'm the guy that's out here chasing the baddies away. Well, this shouldn't have happened. I said, how could we stop it? I said, we can only see that way up the lane. Oh, it shouldn't have happened. But that's the whole point. People weren't interested in explanations. They were annoyed that it had happened. Then it came to the horrible one, which I will tell you. It's another football date, 25th of May. So that was 1971. 25th of May, 1967. You won't remember it unless you're a Glasgow Celtic supporter. That's when they won the European Cup. I'm not a Glasgow Celtic supporter, but I knew the date. And we were sitting in our armoured vehicles, the Pigs, up in Ballymurphy. Very sunny evening, blah, blah, blah. Then we heard this kaboom, big, gee whiz. That's a bomb. And I thought, see, that's from down near battalion headquarters. And of course it was. That was the incident where Sergeant Willett was killed when they awarded the George Cross for the civilians who were there. So we scooted down the road. The soldiers in the back were cheering. They said, hooray, they're going to see some of what we've had to put up with, because we got a lot of that, these little petrol bombs and things thrown at you. When it's thrown at you, you don't get frightened, because it's part of what you're expecting. And occasionally there'd be these blast bombs with nails, and that worried you because you couldn't really see it. You could see the petrol from a petrol bomb, so you knew what you were dealing with. And when we got down, we were the first people there. Bang, stop, out, run round. And we just get in as the survivors were staggering out and told us what had happened. We went into sort of the main room. Sergeant Willits was there. He was already dead, and the doors had been blown off. We put him on a door and carried him out, then got him in the ambulance and got rid of him. And we then lined from battalion headquarters all the way out to as far as the battalion stretched the following day when his body was being taken to be flown back to the UK. So that was a very, very prominent thing, bang. And unfortunately, my platoon sergeant was his best friend. They had both been, Sergeant Wills was a signal sergeant, so was my sergeant, and he was raging. So I said, no, you're staying in the vehicle for the rest of the night. We're not having any nonsense, because he would have got annoyed. So you get confronted with all of these realities. I said, I'll tell you what happened. I'll tell you what you do and what you can't do. Whereas people surround everything with the narrative, the one they've adopted, as though that's fact. You're in these situations. You've got to think them through, and you've got to make sure you get what you consider to be the right decision. In the end, Northern Ireland won funny. Same tour. We were in two funnies. The first one was someone had ambushed a platoon of Scots Guards in the Clonard Monastery. So we were the nearest. So my patrol, I took them in. We got there. We fired a few rounds, and we managed to clear it for them, and there was nobody. We couldn't find anyone, etc. Our colonel turned up and took his beret off and smacked me across the face with it for being such a bad officer. I said, it's not me. I'm here to rescue these guys. I said, oh, I didn't know that. The guards officer got awarded the Military Cross. I'm not looking for a medal. I met him years later. I said, what'd you get it for? He said, remember that time? I said, he must be joking. He said, oh, yes. Well, nothing had happened to the battalion, so we thought we'd need a medal. So I gave it to me. And do you think, this is getting daft? But I did the right thing. My soldiers did the right thing. And But the other one was, and round about the same area, we were in part of a big brigade, huge operation to try and chase people out and capture them. And the company commander said, right, I want those people in that street, I want them cleared, because there might be some shooting, get rid of the civilians getting out of the way. And I briefed the section commanders, the two guys who were going to do it. I said, get over there, clear all those civvies. Anyway, I was on the radio facing the other way, and I heard a bit of shouting, and I turned round, and there was a stramash on the other side of the road where we were clearing it. So I ran over, and my guys had decided that they would clear it. They were grabbing people, by the scruff of the neck and hurtling them down the street. And I said, stop. Don't do that. Just tell them to leave. They will leave. He said, there's going to be some shooting. People will leave straight away. They won't say, no, I'm staying. I'm entitled to stay here. Not like rude cyclists to motor cars. But that was basically it. When I went back the other times, it was, I didn't go out on too many patrols. I went out quite a bit, but it was different. The days of the grandstanding, where lots of attention had gone, it was all these targeted attacks and targeted bombings that happened. You were only ever there after it had happened. And it was very difficult to target the military because we'd become very good at being hard targets.
The episode extras, such as videos, photos and other content, are available via a link in the episode information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous efforts of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening, and look forward to seeing you next week.